Hymn number 570. 570. Let's sing. Each day I'll do a golden deed by helping those who are in need. My life on earth is but a sin, and so I'll do the best I can, the best I can. My evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deed that I have done. Where there will be no setting sun, no setting sun. Let's raise that up a little bit for the big. Each day I'll do. Oh, that's the first verse. Hold on. To be a child of God each day, my light must shine along the way. I'll sing His praise while angels roll and strive to help some troubled souls, Life's evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done. And there will be no setting sun, no setting sun. The only life that will endure is one that's kind and good and pure. And so for God, I'll take my stand. Each day I'll live a helping hand, a helping hand. My evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deed that I have done. And there will be no setting sun, no setting sun. No going down, like weary road. I'll try to live, some travelers go. I'll try to turn the light to day, make flowers bloom along the way, a lonely way. My evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deed that I have done. Where there will be no setting sun, no setting sun. Hymn number 753. 753. Let's sing. Tempted and tried, we're all made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. While there are others living around us, never molested, the meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Father alone will know about it. Father alone will understand why. Cheer up, my brother, living in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Song after lesson will be hymn number 490. 490. Multiple choice. Do or die. Do you remember where we were? I said, who remembers where we were? Acts 25. He looks left and Festus comes. Yeah, where he's talking Festus. Or Festus is there. In fact, it's seen Festus, Acts 24, 24, 25. But right there at Acts 25. It's interesting to go back. It says that Festus had a more knowledge of the way when Paul first appeared before him. What do you think that meant?
Well, the way was a description of what Christianity was at the time, so it sounds like he had some knowledge of it. He apparently heard about it, and, so it's how much, I don't know, but
yeah, we really don't know how much, but it was enough that when Paul first spoke to him, it actually scared him a little bit. Here's a question. Well, in fact, it's a reality. If you realize bad news comes to you about yourself and the way you are, if someone says you just did something illegal, how do you feel? Kind of makes you nervous, right? Let's put it like this. You drive along, you see a blue light coming up behind you, what happens? Huh? You start thinking about it, your stomach, my stomach drops. It started you start thinking, what did I do? Did I do anything? Did I do something? And then what happens? They go by you and you go, okay, what me? Have somebody else. Well, I mean, put that in Felix, Felix, and we're going to look a little bit about his attitude as governor and the way he did things. And you start hearing about sin and having to give account to God, and you having a knowledge of that there will be a resurrection. What's it going to make you start thinking? It's going to make you a little nervous first, okay? So now, after he sends them away, it tells in verse 24 and 25, and after some days when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. So it may be that Drusilla wanted to know more, so he sent for him. The other thing of it is, and this word tells us that he was afraid, that's probably where his knowledge of the way came from. through his wife. She had probably heard about it. I doubt there were very few Jews that hadn't heard about Jesus, especially around Jerusalem. Now, notice how as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and answered, "Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I'll call you." You ever had anybody try and talk to them about what the Bible says, and they just say, well, I don't agree with that, and we'll talk about it later. I don't want to talk about that no more. People do that, especially. I was thinking the other day, how many choices do people have in the New Testament time about religion concerning God? True, huh? How many choices did they have? Huh?
As a Jewish, you had the Old Testament, and then you had the coming of Christ, and so you had the New Covenant.
That's it.
Yeah.
That were your choices. You either follow the Old Testament or you follow what was being taught about Christ. That was
really one choice, obey God.
Well, I understand that, but my point was, if you're trying at some way of serving God and trying to look for God, basically you either had to choose the Old Testament or you had to choose the New Testament. There weren't all these religions polluting the scriptures at that time.
And polluting people's minds.
And in that, polluting people's mind. That's why we have such a problem today. You know, used to be, if you saw a light, you got lost in the dark and you saw a light, what could you do? You figure you can follow that light, you find somebody, right? Somebody that would help, especially if you knew there was somebody to help. Well, today, you got so many lights, sometimes you just get to an empty place. Well, when Satan makes his followers appear as angels of light, or ministers of light, as it says in 2 Corinthians 11, it makes it a little more difficult to distinguish the truth. And that's one. And you're right, there's only one choice where you can be pleasing to God, Teresa, and that's do God's will. But when that all gets polluted, it's hard for people to see those choices. That was the point I'm making. And that's what I'm saying, that they only had this choice. Now, Felix wasn't completely concerned with just that, you know. Luke goes on to say, meanwhile, he also hoped that money would be given by Paul that he might release him. Therefore, he sent for him more often and conversed with him. Okay? So for 2 years, you know, he's held Paul on hopes of one thing. What? A bribe. What would make him think he needed a bribe? You remember last week we were reading that he told him to have liberty. The centurion let him have liberty, let his friends come to him, let them serve him however they wanted to do. But in Paul's defense, he had brought up about that he brought alms to the poor in Jerusalem. What did he tell him? I brought money. What if Festus here? Paul got money, or he's got connections to get money. That's what he heard. That's why he wanted the friends to be able to come in to him and everything so that they could bring perhaps a gift. And it wasn't that uncommon at that time. And notice, but after 2 years, Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix wanted to do the Jews a favor and let Paul bound. Okay, I'm going to do the Jews a favor, and what else am I going to do? Paul never brought me that bribe. That's kind of the attitude. Here's what Calvin said. Felix, trading on his influence in Rome, was an unscrupulous scoundrel. Paul was innocent and should have been released at once, but Felix hoped to get a fat bribe and kept Paul in prison. He put down certain brigands and robbers, but he himself was worse than any of them. Herbie tells how he murdered Jonathan the high priest using the assassins, one of the high priests who held office during the term of Ananias, whose high priesthood was interrupted. The epitaph which history has written by his name is this: with savagery and lust, he exercised the powers of a king with the disposition of a slave. How you like that epitaph? How you like that? Have that epitaph and having to face God?
Just a crooked politician.
Does a crooked politician sound like just a politician? It made me think of this Proverbs, and I had to look them up because I always thinking about that part about a slave where he said the savage love he expires of a king with the disposition of a slave. The writer of this proverb says, "For three things the earth is perturbed. Yes, for four it cannot bear up. For a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a hateful woman when she is married, and a maidservant who succeeds her mistress." What do those all have in common? Think about a servant when he reigns. Someone that's let have a lot of power that never had power, or should have never had power. That kind of fits Festus. He's so far from Rome, he has influence with Rome, that he can exercise his power to the point he can do almost everything he wants, anything he wants, including extract bribes from people, including having that high priest murdered. Okay? This is what too. A fool when he's filled with food. Still a fool when he has no needs. Huh?
I guess he's satisfied.
He's satisfied. He's not going to listen why. There's no reason to listen. He doesn't think there's a reason to listen. Some of them, even when they got totally destitute, don't want to listen. We're not going to get into the other two. I'll get in trouble. Well, I did have to explain those preacher school whenever we came across them, because I started laughing about that third one. So I was told since I understood them, so I did explain it to the rest of the class. So Paul ends up before Festus. So how long was Paul kept by Felix? 2 years. 2 years. So Festus gets approved. Notice now when Festus had come to Providence after 3 days, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. So he's barely there, and where does he go? Jerusalem. Why go to Jerusalem? It was actually the largest city of his province. So it was like, I want to have influence, I need to go there. Now notice, then the high priest and the chief men of the cities informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. So they're like, we want you to give him to us. Have him brought to us. But Festus answered that Paul would be kept at Caesarea, that he himself was going there shortly. So his point is, why wouldn't he bring Paul to him? Huh?
I said he probably felt like it wasn't not going to be good for him.
And we won't worry too much about Paul. We'll get to that in a moment.
So.
It actually comes to Roman law. Where was Paul at? Caesarea. If Paul had not been a Roman citizen, he wouldn't be being kept in Caesarea over something that happened in Jerusalem. That in fact it had already been given to them. So he says, therefore he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and and accuse this man to see if there is any fault in him. So he's kind of like, all right, I'm not going to bring him to you, but I'll let you come to him and we'll examine him there. We'll give him another trial. Felix had left him bound, kind of indicating, well, Paul must have did something. Notice when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. What happens if you hang around with people for 10 days that you don't even really know? Huh?
They're gonna learn a lot of nattering.
They're going to get some influence over you. They're going to keep spinning their web, so to speak. They're going to, first of all, what does Festus have to do? He's got to roll over this providence. His hope is to have influence over these people. They don't even know these people. And so the more he listens to them, the more they're garnering his opinion on their side a little bit. And he's just trying to keep them happy. Another politician. So, then on the judge, it seemed he commanded Paul to be brought. When the Jews had come down from Jerusalem, stood about, and laid many serious complaints against Paul. We read that part about being an ambush. Isn't that what got Paul to move to Caesarea? What had happened? 40 men took vows that they wouldn't eat until Paul was dead.
2 years later, they're starving to death.
2 years later, they're starving. We got to get him over here. Chances are, and I was thinking about today, chances are somewhere they broke that vow. They broke that vow. Okay? But to redeem themselves after breaking that vow, and the change of government, I bet you a lot of them same 40 men said, if you can get them here, we'll kill it. Because under Jewish thought, that would kind of redeem themselves of breaking that vow. So, now notice when the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about, laid many serious complaints against Paul. While he answered for himself, him speaking, saying, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. So what he is saying, you've heard all their complaints. None of this is substantiated. None of this can be proven. I haven't done anything, and they're not able to prove it. So, why are we continuing? That's kind of his point. Why am I here? This is the same thing. And the interesting part, the centurion's letter, his trial before Festus, or Felix, all would have been recorded. So Festus had access to that. And even when he stands for Agrippa, Festus kind of condemns himself for letting it go this far. No, but Festus wanted to do the Jews a favor. Okay, here's the only thing. Did they have some influence over? Yeah. At 10 days, they gained some influence. Wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things? Here we go again. Now, why is he asking him?
Trying to trick him.
Probably because he's a Roman citizen.
Partly because he's a Roman citizen. And both of those are true. He's trying to get him to let himself go.
Has to be.
Because it's easier if Paul agrees to it than him just forcing him to go. It's more explainable. Okay? Especially if something happens to him. Now, notice this is when Paul appeals to you. So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat. He says, you represent Caesar, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. He said, he made it from all the evidence, you know that I've done nothing wrong. Okay? So there's no reason for me to be going before them. Now notice y'all said, or if I'm an offender or I have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. Okay? So what does he say? If I'm guilty, I'll take responsibility for being guilty. But if there is nothing in these things which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. No one has that right, not even you. And he says, I appeal to Caesar. What's his point? If you're not going to judge this fairly and let me go, then I want to go to Caesar. And notice that Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, you have appealed to Caesar you shall go. Why did that? And this is not the council of the Jews. This is the council of his advisors. Now we're talking about Roman law. Could he refuse it? Yes, but it was very rare for them to do so. In fact, it had to be so much evidence that they were overwhelmingly guilty so that they could escape the investigation. Let's put it that way. Because it would come under investigation if anybody ever pushed it up in the courts. Hey, they condemned this man. He refused to let him go to Caesar. He appealed to Caesar. Why? Roman citizenship. That was part of it. That was the guarantee. You know? And so when he listed them, those counselors probably told him, look, dude, you don't want Caesar asking why this guy never got to Caesar. You don't want this coming up. Because if he's right, he should be being let go. And so he's like, to Caesar you should go. Why didn't Festus just say, okay, you're free to go?
To save face. Well, he didn't want to displease the Jews.
No, he didn't want to displease the Jews, but we're going to see he's kind of in a predicament. If he might not save face with the Jews and let him go, but could he save face with? The Romans. The problem is, once Paul appealed to Caesar, there was no going back. Once Paul said that, really he was not able to make a judgment without evidence of what. So he had to go. So that's the point there. So now he is going to end up before Agrippa. And Agrippa, we need to understand, Agrippa's point is not so much as a decision making, but more of a curiosity. It's not a trial. And it starts out by Felix meeting with Agrippa. King Agrippa had came to Caesarea to meet Festus, as we see in verse 13 in Acts 25. And King Agrippa was it was weird, like King Herod and you had Pilate. One wasn't over the other, but Pilate had more authority than Herod. One was to serve over at the area, the greater area, but they didn't really, it was more of the king was appointed to satisfy the local company, citizen. Huh? He's a figurehead. He's kind of a figurehead, but though he did have authority, just like Herod put John the Baptist to death. Now, Herod would not have been able to go like he would, well, he actually, since Paul was Jewish, he would have authority over Paul too, even though he had to observe Roman law. Okay? But that they weren't just a figurehead, but they were kind of a some simian relationship, together.
Co-regent.
Co-regent, there you go. That would be the thing. And he had that title of king, whereas
That was Agrippa.
that's what it was.
Agrippa Jewish.
Agrippa and Bernice both were Jewish.
Well, the
And that's
Romans, that was a method that they
That's
governed was when they took over a country, they would set up puppet leaders within the country that were loyal to them, but the people would perceive that as, well, they haven't put in a dictatorship, a Roman dictator over us, they allow. That was something that that was how accomplished.
right, and they had to serve within the Romans, and that was the point. So they had that governor and king usually had to learn to get along. So this is why Agrippa is even coming down, is to pay homage, so to speak, to Festus, greeting him courtesies. So notice he gets there and says, when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king. He says, okay, he's kind of like, I got a problem. Since we're getting along so well, I'm going to talk to you about it. You probably know more about Jewish culture than I do. He said, there is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me. So basically, first of all, I didn't even know this guy was in the prison until the Jews told him. Then he goes on to say that happened when he was in Jerusalem asking for a judgment against him. Well, he expounds a little bit. They didn't go so far, hey, send him to us and let us try. No, we want him. He understood they wanted to bring judgment and give him in their hands. And he said, to them I answered, it's not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face. So in that 10 days, they laid everything out. We want to kill this man. We want this man put to death. We want to hear him, and if we find him guilty, we want to be able to put him to death. Now, their pretense was, we want to bring you here, you judge, and if he's guilty, let us put him to death. But the plan was, we'll kill him before he gets here. Either way, he's dead. So his point that he makes, and it was customary. And notice, he meets the accused face to face and has the opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him.
That was the Roman law.
That was Roman law.
For a Roman citizen.
For a Roman citizen. Yeah. And so that's why he had to have that little trial in Caesarea, even though his point was, well, if you'll let me, we'll go to Jerusalem. And that way everybody that was there can testify. Because obviously not everybody came. Probably not even those Gentile Jews who are the Asian Jews, let me change that, the Asian Jews from Asia that were the ones that dragged Paul out of the temple. So notice, therefore, when they had come together without any delay, the next day I sat on the judge's seat and commanded men to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I suppose. What is that? Oh, this guy was going to be a really bad guy, but they didn't bring anything like that. But had some questions getting him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. So what should he have done?
They didn't present any evidence that he had done anything.
Done anything worthy of death. They didn't present anything. And it's nothing but about religion. And it's interesting because you see the weakness Felix in this, making this decision. I don't want to offend the people that I have to go on and represent later or be a governor over. I don't want all those problems. So instead of just saying, you know what, he's free to go because you got no evidence, well, would you be willing to go to Jerusalem? And look how he explains Agrippa. And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. Why did he tell that part? Because he really had to. He wasn't going to escape. Why did he appeal to Caesar? Because Felix wanted me to go, or Festus wanted me to go. Festus.
Festus was totally ignorant of their devices and all the things that they were trying to do.
Oh yeah, in fact, some commentators suggest that Festus had not really been very political, strength-wise, talk-wise, and he was probably a new governor, so he was very weak in dealing with people, especially in foreign provinces. So his point was, when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Okay, I won't stop there. Who was Caesar at this time?
Nero.
Nero. Why does he call him Augustus?
That's the names they had.
Who was Caesar Augustus? He's mentioned in the Bible.
That's that was let me see, let me get my memory here. He was when Jesus was living.
When Jesus was born, Caesar Augustus, time it
That's
is,
it.
okay? And he was the second Caesar. He was the one after Julius, and when they took the name of Caesar. And the Augustinians, right up to Nero, were all descendants of Augustus. And they were called the Augustinians, and it became a name for the emperor. Symbolic with Caesar. So that's where it comes from. Okay? So he is referred to Nero in both cases. Okay? And some translations actually, instead of putting Augustus, put the emperor. Okay? Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear it. Okay? We're going to stop there. Because it gets really long after this. Appearing at Agrippa, appearing before Agrippa. There's a lot there in his speech for Agrippa, with Agrippa. But the point that comes back here is, we're at that point that it set it up. And what's Festus really looking for?
A way out.
A way out. That's exactly it. He's looking for a way out. Help me out here, Agrippa. Help me out. What am I going to do? Now, what's Agrippa doing?
He's just curious about what.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what he's going to say. I want to hear some of this. I want to hear what he teaches.
Yeah, all he's heard their side of the story, and it didn't hold water. So.
Well, and I think at this point, because they're not going to, the Jews are not going to be brought up. The Jews aren't going to be called up. This thing's going to happen tomorrow. He's going to be allowed to speak. And the point comes back is that it's not a trial. It's not even any kind of type of trial. It's just Paul's chance to appear for Agrippa, tell him completely his side, his beliefs, what happened, and Agrippa to learn something about Jesus. That's what it really comes back to. Agrippa wants to know what is being taught.
God had him right where he wanted him.
Huh?
God had him right where he wanted him.
God had him right where he wanted it. This is an important thing to keep in mind when you're here. And Paul, first of all, Jesus, when Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, had appeared to to Paul and told him that you shall testify to me before Rome. So you're going all the way to Rome. And it's going to be all these heads of states that you're going to stand for. So the thing, that vision that he got from Jesus is coming true. Okay, that's the first thing. Paul told the Corinthians, I did not come to baptize, but to preach. Okay? He preached to Felix. He preached to all those Jews when they drug him out of the temple. Then he preached to Felix. Then he preached to Festus. And I know I got Felix up there. It's confusing. It's Festus here. So, but he preached to Festus without a baptism. Did he fail in doing what God required of him? No, because what does preaching do?
Leads that person
Leads that person to
to,
Make a decision.
make a decision.
yes.
Okay? It gives them the opportunity. That's all preaching is supposed to do. Give them the opportunity to accept the truth or turn away from the truth. If they accept the truth, what's going to happen? As we know the truth. Or as the truth is taught in Scripture. Baptism is going to be a result. Like the jailer. What if they disregard it? Huh? That's kind of true. They'll be discarded. That's what's going to happen to judgment. But one thing they're not going to be able to do is say, I didn't hear. See? It's like preaching lets people know they're going to be held accountable. They can reject it. They can say, well, I don't think that's the way it's going to be. But
As we know, it's better to never heard than to hear and reject.
yeah, and they hear reject, and it's better, and Peter takes it a little further, and when he makes a statement, it's better to never have known the truth than have known it and turn away from it. And that known there is not one that, hey, I just heard it. Huh? I was actually obedient to it, and I turned away from it. And that's why I use those proverbs about sow that having been washed returns to the mire, and the dog eating its own vomit. It's basically saying a Christian who returns to sin is homesickness in the eyes of God.
And of course, we haven't got there, and we won't get there tonight, but a little later on, Festus still has their write these charges up, and he don't know what he's going to write.
Yeah, that's going to be when his introduction, he's going to admit that. I brought him to you, and I actually talked to you so you give me an idea of what am I supposed to write? Because I got to sing to Caesar.
I got to have something written up.
I got to have something written up, or Caesar going, why are you bothering me? Why don't you let this man go? Which is probably the case. We need to keep in mind, this time of Nero, you know, Nero at this time was about 4 to 5 years into his reign, and he is actually looking like a pretty good emperor.
Before he got sick.
Yeah, huh?
Before he got sick.
Before he got sick, yeah.
They say, well, they have about it, but he had mental problems, and that created him to do what he did.
And so that's what it came about. And let's put it that way, maybe we best put it that way. Before he totally went nuts and just thought he could do anything he wanted, and thought actually before he started thinking of himself truly as a demigod. That's what really ended up happening to him. He started thinking of himself as a demigod, much like Domitian. And so those things. So at this point, he says, okay, tomorrow. So in 2 weeks. Because next week's the youth. So in 2 weeks, we'll pick up this study. Trying to think. We need somebody for class in 3 weeks. Because I'll be in Florida. Any volunteers?
Yeah, I'll check.
You'll check? Okay. All right. Invitation song,
490.
490, let's stand and sing.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my heart has told me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well, with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as the scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. Amen. You listen to that prayer? Closing prayer.